I don't claim to be any kind of expert on wrestling. I think that my perceived depth of knowledge on wrestling mostly comes from recognition of patterns and trends, but I think that what I can claim is an actual understanding of what wrestling exists to be. The obvious implication with that can be seen as a bit loaded. It certainly sounds like I'm saying that a lot of people don't understand wrestling, the entertainment medium that is among the least deep and complex to grasp, and I don't want to come across as arrogant, so let me clear the air. Yes, most of you don't understand wrestling or anything about it. I have a lot of theories as to why you don't understand wrestling. That's not really what I want to get into here, but instead, I want to try to go over some things that I have read reactions to that I feel are completely off base and try to pitch my thoughts on the discourse and give my own perspectives. Because if I claim to have some kind of rare understanding or insight, I think it would be unfair for me to just say that everyone is stupid. I don't think you're stupid. I think you're wrong, and those aren't inherently linked. Backlash 2025 was a card that I think that a lot of people weren't excited for. It comes just a few weeks after a WrestleMania card that most people were not super jazzed on, and a whole lot of very negative publicity for the company in most online circles, which are the circles that I frequent. So the buzz for the card among the people I consider my peers was decidedly dour. All that said, I think that every match overperformed and executed on the fundamental ideas of pro wrestling at an incredibly high level, only for me to check the internet and see that not only is that a rare take, but the actual opinions being given on it are completely fucking insane. So let's talk about it. I don't want to linger too long on this, but one of the big points of contention for the card was before a single match even happened. A lot has been made of the Triple H-led decision to limit non-WrestleMania and SummerSlam PLE cards to 5 matches. A lot of people don't like it because they feel it limits the amount that these cards can feature. Most people, I think, are pretty benign on it. Personally, I love the choice. I think that WWE using a 3 to 3.5 hour runtime to make sure that 5 matches get time and are good is better than using 3 to 3.5 hours on 9 matches, where most of them suck and are of little consequence, but I won't pretend like this objection doesn't have merit, at least in theory. In my video about Lyra Valkyria and Bayley, I talked about the mental prisons in wrestling discourse that leads to anger around title matches not being on WrestleMania, believing that the belts not being defended at the event paints them as lesser than. I go into the idea much more in that video, and it's really insightful and interesting, so you should go watch that one if you want more information, but to summarize, I think that the idea that matches being on PLEs have an inherent value over ones on television is at best short-sighted, and at worst, using your voice in a way that ensures wrestling is extremely limited moving forward. The major reason that people feel like matches on PLEs have an inherent value is because of the idea that weekly TV is used to promote the special named events. So when matches don't happen on those events, it communicates to fans that it is of a lesser value. I think this is an idea that WWE doesn't always help with how much more likely TV matches are to end in tomfoolery or extended angles, but I don't think that this is a perspective that necessarily holds a lot of water in modern wrestling, especially WWE. If you're a believer in following where the money is, then WWE is 100% incentivized to bolster their television shows, as TV rights pay their bills far, far more than the existence of these premium live events. There are 4 Raws a month and 1 to 2 premium live events. So the notion that no title matches can happen there unless they are of lesser value just doesn't make sense economically or efficiently. Fans sticking to it because it existed much more in the past just limits you to how you're able to consume good wrestling, and it also has the potential to limit what is actually shown on TV. If people's voices got loud enough, you could see the weekly shows, which are a vast majority of the content that the WWE produces, actually get reduced to promotional material for the PLEs that everyone in the 2010s said were too long with too many matches and not enough good ones, all for the benefit of literally nobody. That tag title TLC match was on SmackDown instead of WrestleMania. It's great that it was on SmackDown. It got more time, more focus, felt bigger, and mattered more because it was on SmackDown. If it was at WrestleMania, it would have been cut down, chopped up, and forgotten because things would have happened after it. So wishing that it would have been on WrestleMania is this idealized world that just couldn't exist. One of the major reasons this change doesn't resonate with people outside of that general complaint is because the ratios don't line up. When Triple H was in NXT, he was able to run these 5-match takeover cards where every match was 20 minutes and special, largely because they existed in contrast with the bloated shitter main roster cards. Those cards are impossible to recreate on the main roster because NXT was a shell corp that was allowed to lose money to put on PWG events with air conditioning. But the events were significant because the way they were done, they'd happen every 2 to 3 months, and because NXT had so few titles, a 5 or 6 match takeover card would feature every title plus some other individual matches, which satisfies the little man in your brain that needs completion. But on the main roster, the cards will feature 2 or 3 of the 600 titles, and then also some other individual matches, which gives the little man in your brain cancer. My perspective on these cards existing on the main roster the way that they are is that the only way they don't work is if title matches don't happen regularly outside of them, or if the PLE events aren't frequent enough that it limits how many of them can exist. As it stands now, neither of these problems exist in the slightest. There were periods in 2024 where the title matches weren't happening frequently enough, but there's been an uptick in champions wrestling and defending, so that's been remedied, at least for now. But the PLE schedule for WWE is so comically full that it actually fucks the main roster over a lot. Because the 4 weeks leading up to Elimination Chamber will be filled with qualifying matches and promos building up to the Elimination Chamber, but that takes such a big portion of the shows that so little is able to move until that event is over. In the 6 weeks after WrestleMania 41, there's Backlash, Saturday Night's Main Event, and Money in the Bank. These events are happening constantly, and title matches that don't make it onto these events are happening on TV. The only way these things are a problem is if you believe that them happening on TV makes them significantly worse or makes them significantly less valuable. Which, on one hand, I do understand, but it's an idea that doesn't actually have any merit in 2025. I don't think I could say enough good about the Lyra Valkyria versus Becky Lynch match to adequately communicate what that match made me feel. It genuinely might be the perfect wrestling match. And before you little goblins who get weird when I say women's wrestling matches are the best start chiming in, I think that perfect wrestling match is a distinction given to things that are not necessarily indicator of quality, even though I do think that this match was incredibly good. Perfect is a descriptor as it pertains to match construction and getting across what it needed to while remaining compelling as a spectator event. Because of the culture around women's wrestling, I don't think that they are generally allowed to fully wrestle epic matches that often. Charlotte Flair has been involved in her fair share of epics. Her matches with Rhea Ripley and the WrestleMania match with Ronda Rousey are some of the best examples of modern-day epics, regardless of sex. And while Becky has been in a handful, they almost always fall to the big stadium shows like WrestleMania or SummerSlam with other big-time performers like Charlotte or Bianca Belair. The fact that arguably the most definable modern epic in WWE happened at Backlash for a mid-card title is truly astonishing, and I just didn't expect that at all. I expected a good match, but I didn't think it would be like that. For the people who remember me talking about New Japan, a match like this is why I didn't like so many Kazuchika Okada matches. That goo would wrestle Sonata for 30 minutes and it would be really boring and really shitty. And the alternative is that you could communicate those big epic beats in around 19 minutes and also include some actual perfect finisher kickouts and some old school dusty stuff like ref bumps and weapon spots. One of the best things that this match did was call back to their NXT match finish, where Lyra counters the manhandle slam into a roll-up, and constantly evolve it within the logic of the match. Lyra tries the same roll-up early and gets an ear fall. Becky Lynch reverses Lyra into the manhandle slam successfully, Lyra kicks out. End of the match, Becky goes for the manhandle slam and instead transitions into a roll-up herself because Lyra has reversed it 4 or 5 times and kicked out of it twice. Matches like this is why I stick around in this evil, evil game of watching pro wrestling. Some people want cinema, but to me, this is cinema. If people who watch this saw the way I talk about Lyra Valkyria to friends of mine, you would be disgusted at how much I glaze this otherworldly talent. Lyra Valkyria is special. Truly and honestly special in a world where the cream rises to the top 99% of the time, which means so many of her peers are also special. There was an observation that I made at the start of the year when I was frustrated with how Triple H handled the big-time wrestlers on the roster, namely people like Braun Breaker and Gunther. There are people in the world of wrestling who benefit greatly from wrestling less. There's this idea of scarcity and making the outings valuable that really contributes to how someone like Roman Reigns can be seen as good. Personally, I've never been a fan of seeing wrestlers who are supposed to be good appear less because I don't believe in handicapping my own entertainment, but I understand that the scarcity does benefit some wrestlers. But if that's true, there are some wrestlers who absolutely benefit from being out there as much as possible. Not even in the sense that I think that they should be wrestling more frequently, which I think is the case for Braun Breaker, but there are wrestlers whose charisma and personalities and entire sense of aura is derived from constant exhibitions of that skill. The obvious pinnacle of this is Bryan Danielson. Bryan can talk, he could be made to feel like a big deal, his perspectives are fascinating, and his insights are valuable. But you will never be more interested in him than when he is wrestling because his genius and charisma are unlocked when the bell rings. Another great example of this is Jonathan Gresham. You see how he moves and how he thinks and how he applies himself in the ring, how cocky he gets and how smart he can be, and you fully understand why his character carries himself that way. Lyra Valkyria is 100% one of these wrestlers. When the bell rings, Lyra isn't just flashy or fun, which I think distinguishes a wrestler like this from a wrestler like Ricochet, where the value is in their performance, but they don't demonstrate more personality through their wrestling. When Lyra is wrestling, the way she works is so expressive and vocal without having to cut promos mid-match. You just get it. The performance she put in at Backlash was special, and it's something that I don't know how she learned as an indie wrestler that led into NXT UK. I don't know where she learned poise after big spots, and the internal clock to not sit in a submission for too long, and also not transition immediately so that the Neanderthal audience doesn't fall asleep. I don't know where she learned to do the surfboard, and before locking it in, lean down to talk shit about how much better you are, all while knuckling Becky's ribs to bring up her arms and never leave a moment where there isn't something interesting happening. I don't know where she learned to cross the legs and use that to hook with her own legs and reverse the armbar. Who taught her those things? I know it wasn't anybody in WWE because those people aren't that smart. Lyra's performance at Backlash was the first time that fear was put into my heart as a Roxy guy that Lyra Valkyria might just be legitimately undeniable. After every exceptional performance over the last year, I've believed that Lyra was special, but that Roxy was still her. Backlash sent a shiver down my spine. That shit was not normal, and I'm very, very glad that most people aren't acting like it was. Becky Lynch, on the other hand, is an impossible wrestler. I'm not going to linger on it for too long because someone's talking about Becky Lynch and brings up the other four horsewomen. Take a drink. But there is a reason why people do that. And it's because Becky Lynch is an impossible wrestler in a peer group of four impossible wrestlers. The four horsewomen have always been regarded extremely highly. Even if you're weird about Charlotte Flair or Sasha Money, I feel like it's undeniable that they're amazingly good wrestlers. But what makes Becky so impossible among the group is just how giving she is. If you made a sliding scale, with the right being very protective of how you're booked and who you put over, and the left being down to work with anybody if it makes them look good, the horsewomen fall about here. But what makes this scale so interesting is that once you introduce the axes of profile, Becky Lynch is the only person who is as big of a star as she is who is willing to work with anybody, making them look good and lose to the right people. In terms of Becky's best comparison, it might honestly be Mick Foley, a veteran who is so giving despite being such a big star to the point that even as Becky walks away from being a full-time act, she's still willing to come back, do a run, and get the people they want over, as Foley did with Edge and Orton. It's extremely rare and special to find someone who is a legend, who is treated like a legend, who has the aura of a legend, who acts the way that Becky does. She has the vibe of someone who was not supposed to be a high-profile main eventer, scratched and clawed to get there, and truly never forgot that she wasn't supposed to be there, so she pays it forward every chance she gets. Wrestling needs far more Becky Lynches than it needs more Roman Reigns. And if you don't like that, you can go fuck yourself. Becky's performance at Backlash is also unreal because so often, people who are heels wrestle in a way that make a babyface pop, and they confuse wrestle like a heel with boring and bad. Becky is not a boring or bad heel wrestler, but she could also never be confused for a face, which sets her apart from someone like Liv Morgan, whose attitude as a heel wrestler is mostly just being loud and taunting the crowd, but her actual moves are the same as when she's a babyface, so it creates a disconnect. Becky wrestled like a heel in the best way. She was compelling, she commanded attention, but she never did anything cool. So when Lyra would fire back in her comeback and shine segments, it popped. It was an impossible performance from two impossibly talented women. And it couldn't have happened unless Becky Lynch was the most special wrestler of her generation. I feel like I've said I don't want to linger too long on things, and then I keep yapping. But the way people have responded to Gunther and Pat McAfee is something that I really feel like I could spend too long on. So I'm going to try to keep my takes as short as I can without cutting ideas, but you know how it goes. I get that people are weird about Gunther and the World Wrestling Federation. They are so scared of the other shoe dropping and him getting dressed like a genie or something because he doesn't do Fortnite dances. And so this match being booked with Pat McAfee spooks people. But I guess the first thing I'll say is get a fucking grip. I get that you weird fucks hate Jey Uso and think he sucks, so losing to him makes you shit. But Jey Uso has like 3 clean losses in the last 4 years, and I think 2 of them are to Gunther. So if you're terrified of fucking Gunther being made to look like a joke, you're losing the plot. When it comes to Pat McAfee, people don't like him as a commentator, a personality, or a person. And I'm not going to say you have to like anybody, but that disdain for McAfee, or the idea of Gunther losing to Jey Uso and then wrestling a commentator instead of pure graps or whatever, has led to some of the dumbest perspectives of all fucking time. The biggest one I want to tackle is something that people talk about now and then, and it's always insane, and that's power scaling. Saying that Gunther should be strong enough that a non-wrestler should get blown up by him, so the match being at all competitive makes Gunther look like shit and like he's weak. This idea comes up now and then when a main eventer wrestles someone who's not a main eventer. And it's always an idea made in such bad faith because it's using logic that wrestling has almost never utilized to judge how a company sees somebody, thus how they're communicating to people how they should feel. Now and then people will make suggestions that to them sounds like they're saying normal stuff. Like, main event wrestlers should blow out people who are not main eventers or it makes them look weak. And they think it's just a switch that you can flip and not extremely radical and requires an entire shift in cultural understanding. We could talk about introducing a power scale to pro wrestling. Sure, let's have that conversation. But if we do that, we have to talk about what that actually entails, which is that sometimes things will just have to be bad. I come from watching actual sports where a power scale is just skill discrepancies. And sometimes big hyped up fights or championship games are just blowouts because of a discrepancy or a mismatch. And unless you're willing to hold to that as a wrestling fan, you need to just swallow this stupid power scale idea. I get the idea is wrestling is a work, so you're able to have both of these ideas, but I promise you, you actually can't. Wrestling exists in a functional space, meaning that the decisions that are made don't consider internal logic. They're done to communicate one point that works for that story. This is an idea that completely eludes wrestling fans, who could see Gunther go 40 minutes with Ilya Dragunov in a blood and guts war, and then he struggles in a 12-minute match with Jey Uso, and they think it's stupid. But those two have nothing to do with one another, and acting like you want it to is not only delusional, but it's probably the most radical idea you can introduce to the idea of booking wrestling. It's not just as easy as we'll consider it, it spirals very fast. All of that conversation is purely theoretical and doesn't pertain to Gunther versus Pat McAfee directly. People saying that Pat McAfee standing toe-to-toe with Gunther makes Gunther look weak. And I can't help but believe that the people who truly and honestly think that are either viewing the match with the least charitable lens possible or just flat out didn't fucking watch it. Saying, lol, Gunther went 20 minutes with a commentator, they're treating him like shit, betrays that you just didn't watch it because the literal story of the match is Gunther is refusing to just beat Pat McAfee, which he could easily do. If you didn't gather that from him no-selling Pat's offense for 90% of the match, then you should probably get it from when he does a big move and Michael Cole yells at Gunther to end it because he's proven his point. Saying shit like the match was designed to get Pat McAfee over as a good guy is mostly just bad faith interpretations. I won't say you're not allowed to have those, but don't act like you're willing to be charitable and you're just calling it how you see it. The match was designed to get people to cheer while Pat McAfee gets his shit pushed in, and that's what happened. It was a squash match in all but length. You're being weird if you think otherwise. The last thing I'll say about how people treated this match is how people talk about Gunther's booking. People have been so fucking mystified at why Gunther is wrestling Pat McAfee, saying they're wasting his time wrestling a commentator, but this is where I'll say that you people don't get wrestling. In the world of wrestling booking, at least in America and at least with the major companies, the best thing that you can be is not a super protected champion, but it's being booked in general. People have made a point to talk about the last class of NXT call-ups in Braun Breaker, Tiffany Stratton, Lyra Valkyria, and Carmelo Hayes, comparing the booking of the former three in contrast to the latter, pointing out that they have been strong champions while Melo is a jobber to the stars. And while I think that there's a valid perspective in that, I would never say that Melo is not viewed somewhat positively by the WWE because he's constantly booked on shows. He's just a lower card heel, so his role is to lose. Same with Judgment Day. People make a big deal about Finn Balor, but he's on 3 segments of every show and is constantly doing stuff, and that's a sign of commitment by companies like WWE and AEW. After WrestleMania, every single title was occupied in stories, and in the course of 2 weeks, Gunther got a big showcase match at a PLE with a high-profile commentator in one of the hottest matches of the night. In what world where you understand that being booked is the most valuable commodity in wrestling is this match being booked a bad thing for Gunther? He looked crazy strong, he had a great match, and the company clearly believes in him because they gave him a filler stay busy feud so that he remains on TV. Call me with concern when Gunther doesn't show up for a while. Until then, cram it in your cram hole. John Cena versus Randy Orton is a match that a lot of people have been gaslighting me about, and I won't allow it. Before it was booked, people were excited at the prospect almost solely for nostalgia, and you know what? I'll allow it just this one time. Cena versus Orton as one of Cena's last feuds works well because the fact that John Cena sucks won't cause a schism in your nostalgic memory of this pairing. They had terrible matches then as well, so it really will feel like it was 15 years ago. After it was booked, I think that people were vaguely excited, but then on the night, I saw a sentiment that floated around about how the build was trash. And I know that I'm on an entirely different planet from wrestling fans when it comes to builds, but I truly don't understand what people wanted. I mean, I do get what they wanted, but my perspective on wrestling builds comes almost entirely from watching MMA and New Japan. That being that once the match is booked, you basically don't have to think about it until it happens because the interesting parts come from the actual watching of the match. I understand that WWE is not designed for that, which is why my perspective is one that accommodates it. I don't need anything more than that, which means that any promos, segments, or content that hypes it up is bonus. All I needed from John Cena versus Randy Orton, a match that has always sucked from 2 wrestlers I didn't think were very good at the best that they are long past now, was to feel like the history that the two have shared felt like it existed in the material and not just inferred. And in my opinion, WWE did a great job at making them feel like they had a lot of history dating back 20 plus years. But a lot of people were upset about the build, and the only reason I can glean why is how they understand wrestling match build-ups to be. A lot of people view the builds to wrestling matches in a binary way. Are they constantly around each other or not? And if they're not, they feel like it's unsatisfying. Because Cena and Orton only had one promo battle together and they didn't reminisce about their history, Randy Orton didn't say he was fighting to avenge Cody Rhodes, they didn't brawl and get bloody or whatever, people say that this match felt unimportant, and I'll accept that on the merit that Randy Orton was obviously not winning and they didn't do a lot to dress that up, but I'm truly not sure what people wanted with the limited time. People have said that their history wasn't dived into at all, but what did you want them to say? They felt like 2 people who have been around each other for a long time and have lost respect for what they've become versus what they both were. They feel like 2 dogs from a previous generation fighting one more time over the legacy that they both value in entirely different ways. That history didn't feel absent at all. So what did people want? I don't even like this match on paper, but the booking and build up to it I thought were excellent. It just wasn't 10 promos, so people are upset about it. I don't know, man. I don't want to defend this shitter rivalry that is fake legendary, but you kids need to get a grip on what you want from things. The actual match itself was one that I thought was great. It's easily in the higher end of their matches, but it was entirely not for me. I thought that the callbacks to their 2 or 3 good spots were cute. The RKO during the 5 moves of Doom, the RKO reversal of the AA, Orton stomping on limbs, those are cute. But it's basically a match that is all smoke and mirrors being played for a person that recognizes patterns and trends that the smoke and mirrors are trying to obscure. I'm not saying I'm too smart for Orton and Cena, I just looked for something else to make me interested because God knows their work wasn't going to be interesting or captivating to me. Still, I enjoyed the match. It was overbooked, but they did a lot to cover up the fact that they are worse than they were before when they were also bad, which I do admire. More bad wrestlers should be protected like these 2 assholes. When it comes to John Cena, I have a lot of thoughts about his heel turn that largely don't really fit into this video. What I will say is that it was extremely obvious to me from the second he did his first heel promo that John Cena is a man stuck out of time. This heel run is mostly cathartic for John Cena, who was not allowed to talk about how the crowds hating him made him feel for 20 years, and now he's able to let some of that out. But there are times where you can tell that he's having a hard time mixing the actual feelings with a compelling delivery or content that is worth watching. Cena's real feelings and catharsis are locked in from a time where he was active and less appreciated, something that hasn't happened in over a decade. As he vents his frustrations, it is entirely disconnected because he's speaking to an audience that generally wants to cheer him because he's a legend and is appreciated now. But the biggest place that Cena feels like he's completely out of touch with modern WWE is how he has made his 2 title matches. WrestleMania, I don't know what that was about. He was terrible. But the Orton match felt like much more of a late-stage John Cena match in that it was a bunch of finisher spam, and that really isn't what the main event WWE style is like anymore. The closest it comes is Cody Rhodes doing the Rolling Crossroads, which is just his iteration on Okada retaining wrist control to land the Rainmaker again, which clearly isn't the same. Cena didn't create this trend. It's much more of a Brock Lesnar thing post-ending the streak. But still, even Cena's, quote, good matches suffer from a lot of finisher spam because finishers equal hype, so more finishers is more hype. They did a lot to dress up the Cena and Orton match at Backlash, which I do appreciate because I think that dressing up bad ideas is more commendable than insisting bad ideas are good actually, but let's call a spade a spade. John Cena is 10 years out of touch with wrestling. He was never modern or the moment or a trendsetter in ring because he was never the special wrestlers that you guys claim he was, but he was adequate normally and really excelled in no DQ matches where he could do absurd spots. The WWE moving away from plunder and pillage as their house style was always going to disproportionately hurt Cena, but especially following the most professional wrestler Cody Rhodes, he feels like a fish out of water. Backlash was a really cool event where every match overperformed in my opinion. Hopefully, if you've made it this far, you can appreciate some of the sentiments expressed beyond me complaining about wrestling fans and their reactions to things, because while that is the inspiration for a lot of my ideas, I really do mostly like speaking in an educational way because I know that my perspectives are not ones that are shared by a lot of people. I'm currently working on some stuff that will be extremely unhinged and unasked for. It's very sane and very stable stuff. But until then, this is what I've got. Thanks for watching.